Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Explore, Explain. My name's Andy Kirk and welcome to this episode, a special guest from the other side of the planet, Kat Greenbrook. Kat, it's wonderful to have you along for this episode. It's wonderful to meet you finally after all these years. For the benefit of the viewers and the listeners, can you just give people a short intro for yourself, please?
Kia ora, Andy. Thank you for the invite. I have been hanging out to have this conversation with you. So I am based in Wellington, New Zealand, and I work as a data storyteller, which means that I use a story structure to communicate the meaning of data. And I work with a lot of government agencies and larger corporations to teach them how to tell their data stories.
Brilliant. And I think you might be my second New Zealander in the episode. We have Kath Sleeman in the first season. I'm desperately quickly going through my Rolodeck of guests to make sure I've not ignored anyone. But yeah, it's wonderful to have the chance to chat. And there's all sorts of things that I want to kind of get through in the next hour or so. And all of it is sort of centered around the book that you published. I think it was the end of last year, about December time, 2023, the Data Storyteller's Handbook, which is brilliant. And I love it to bits. And I was hoping to have a copy to hold up for people watching the video. I can't find it. My book organization is chaotic, so I will deal with that. But in the post-episode show notes, we'll get all the links out there. But yeah, I want to talk about the book and the sort of journey you went through with the book, but also sort of wrap it around the wider context of your freelancing career, your sense of belonging to the data viz world and how you got into it. So I think the obvious probably starting point for this is to think about your background. And I'm sure that you often recognize this with all the people that are in data viz. We all have different sort of natural sensibilities or like a starting point that gets us into data viz. When I was at school, I was very much into art and maths, and that kind of gave me a bit of I guess a natural leaning when I found this subject to say, yeah, that's my subject. What was your, as a kid's early kind of adult life, what were your passions? What were your hobbies? What were your strengths, shall we say, academically, that maybe just give you a few clues that this might be the destination?
So when I was in high school, I was really torn between science and art. Those were the two fields that I gravitated towards. So at the last year of high school, I did all the sciences. So biology, chemistry, physics. I did calculus and
Wow.
I did painting.
Oh, and
So
painting, right, okay.
yeah, and painting. So at the end of high school, you kind of have to make a choice between one or the other. And I chose science. I actually really wanted to be a vet, so I did all that
Right.
because I was hoping to go off and study veterinary science. But I was definitely drawn to the art side, I think, just as much as the sciences.
And when you therefore kind of started your working career, obviously you have to pick a route. You have to you've got to start somewhere. You're going to go in a direction. Were you immediately feeling any sort of tension with the thing that you were doing for your job, and it maybe not ticking the box of the other sensibilities that you were having to suppress or put to the side?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who maybe work in this space feel that way, because there wasn't before Database came along, there wasn't really a career that I could see that incorporated both of those things. It
Yeah.
was either, as you say, you pick a science or maths route, and then you pick a design and art route. There wasn't something that merged those two things. And so for me, my background is in analytics, and I always enjoyed it. but there was always this kind of more creative side that was definitely missing from that particular role.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think it's on your web bio about maybe about a decade working in different analytics roles. I think you list reporting analyst, insight analyst, data scientist. I had a sort of similar initial 10 years of my working career working as an analyst, so working in spreadsheets and numbers and
Mm.
VLOOKUPs
Yep.
most days of work. Um, and I guess within that there is a degree of creativity that comes into even working with those things.
Mhm.
I'm thinking about. I know that your book, when we get onto it, was released around the same time as Ali Tobin's book,
Yeah.
Chart Spark. Yeah, Chart Spark.
Yep.
Um, and one of the things that's kind of key to that book is that creativity is not just creating. It's not just about the output. It's about sometimes tackling things with a creative mindset, a different mindset. And so, I guess where I'm getting at with this is, did you feel that even though you were working in a fairly analytical role, that you were able to bring some artistry to bring some flair to that? And were you involved in presenting the data as well in that role, or in those roles? Sorry.
Yeah, I think back then when I was doing it, and we're talking maybe 8 or 9 years ago now that I was in the full-time data scientist role. I definitely think there was creativity involved in that role. So I think you do have to be creative in how you tackle some of those
Mm,
projects. But I think there's also something different about the more art design type of creativity. For me, that just it was a different way of expressing. And I didn't have that in the data science role. Yes, I was involved in communicating data, but not, I don't think in the way that, well, definitely not in the way that I am today. So
mm,
that whole data storytelling thing side of things, it wasn't even a term. People
yeah, yeah,
didn't even know that the term exists. I mean, data viz wasn't really a thing that was talked about. It wasn't a field like it is today. So that was definitely missing from that side of the work that I was doing.
yeah. And one of the things you talk about as well is this perhaps career junction where um, maybe you're feeling this sense of dissatisfaction with maybe what you're working on and what people are doing with that work.
Mm.
And again, I can sort of remember moments when I was, frustrated by the things that I was doing that would just then just drift onto somebody else and end up on a desk or end up going nowhere further. And I always wanted to be, I guess, the sort of frontline professional, not the sort of support professional, kind of feeding other people. But
Mm.
you took quite a sort of dramatic sort of left turn at this point, because you talk about how you then went on to do a graphic design degree, which is a brilliant left turn. So, what made you pick that as the stepping stone to move away from what you were doing and towards whatever you felt was on the horizon beyond that?
Well, I guess they say if you're doing something you don't enjoy, you kind of overcompensate and go completely in the
Yeah,
opposite direction. And I
right.
guess that's what I did. I wasn't enjoying the data science work as much as I was. I did feel really frustrated because I would create these models and the organizations I was working with, they just quite weren't ready to operationalize it yet. And so you're doing all this awesome stuff with technology, but it's not creating any business impact whatsoever because it can't be, they can't incorporate it into whatever else is going
Mm,
on. And so studying graphic design was my kind of way of thinking maybe I do need a career change right now. And I always kind of look back at high school art and think what would have happened if I had followed that pathway. Where would that have led?
yeah.
And so I went back and I studied with the intention on actually leaving the data field and doing something completely different. It just so happened that, as fate would have it, this was around about the time that data visualization started to get quite popular. So I was in a good place at the right time.
That's it. And so much about this is about opportunity and about just things lining up perfectly. And again, I always feel ever so fortunate that I just found the subject when I did. There's no
Mm.
reason why you know anyone can't get into it, and it just happens that my circumstances lined up. And if again, a sort of takeaway for anyone else out there who's thinking, my current track isn't quite the right feel. There are other pathways out there, and it just, I guess, it always just needs that opportunity, but I guess that courage. It's not an easy thing to just jump out of a career and say, right, I'm going to go and study again and get into this thing,
Mm.
which, as you say, you might not even at that point had a permanent idea what that was going to lead to, but it was certainly going to open up new opportunities, I guess. Just on that graphic design degree, I often feel, because again, I was hoping to maybe do that as a degree after school. I felt I was okay at art, but I got a really bad grade because we weren't taught the curriculum to get the good grades out of school. That's a totally different podcast. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I often wonder what extra things I would be good at had I had that education in design. And there's a lot of people out there who sometimes, I don't know, maybe just back away a little bit from any sense of they're recognizing themselves as designers, or if they see the
Mm.
notion of design as being part of, for example, a course. Well, I'm not a designer, so this is not for me. But when you're making something, a chart, you are going through the process of design. So it is at the heart of all this. But looking back now, what do you feel were some of the kind of major things that degree helped to sort of cement in your capabilities in data viz?
Yeah, I think going into it, I didn't have a grasp of any kind of fundamentals. I knew whether I liked something or not, but I couldn't tell you
Yeah.
why I liked it. And I think that was a big takeaway for me, was just going back and learning some of those really basics and why you do things certain ways. And also just learning what tools do what. And I know
Mm,
everyone has different tool sets that they prefer, even in the design space. So I like the Adobe suite.
yeah.
So I live in Adobe Illustrator, I like InDesign, After Effects, those kind of tools. But there are other tools out there. So I think part of it is learning the fundamentals in a tool agnostic way, but also learning what tools do what and what you prefer to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, I think what you said there, I think about knowing why you like something is such an important thing. I often find maybe that's where I missed out on that education, because I talk a lot about in database about things like elegance, and sometimes I have to reduce it down to a feeling. You can sort of
Mm.
you feel something, or you feel when it's missing perhaps more than when it's present. But I often feel that I can't quite articulate that next level of critical thinking about something that is an aesthetic judgment, that is
Mm.
fundamentally a subjective judgment. And so, obviously things like layout and color and typography are key components of graphic design, but also in data viz
Yeah.
design. And these are things that we can all do better at, but we can also learn a bit more about to distinguish good and bad, which is something which is fairly established for, let's say, a chart choice being a good or bad choice, but something that's much more subjective, I think, is a difficult thing to articulate to a lot of people. Now, just going back to this kind of moment of you've done, or you're doing the graphic design degree, and you sort of say that simultaneously this field is emerging and or maybe getting recognized as a thing. Where did you go next? So what was the sort of jumping off point from the degree to, right, I'm now a data viz person or a data storyteller? What was that sort of next? And this is perhaps just before freelancing, which we'll get into shortly. But what
Mm.
was that sort of next
Mm.
segue?
So I was working and studying. So I was working as an analytics consultant as well as doing the design study. So that job was still going on. So I just
Right.
started to incorporate more of the design and
I
visuals
see. Right.
into the work that I was doing. And it wasn't always data visualization. So I was working for quite a small BI consulting company. And so we didn't have a designer or somebody in charge of marketing or anything like that. So any kind of visual that needed to be created, I was like, oh, I'll do that. And it was just a chance to practice.
Yeah.
And I think part of learning and getting good at design is practice. And this is not really what people always want to hear, because they kind of do just want to go to a course and do a degree and then all of a sudden become an expert. But I
Yeah.
think a big part of learning design and learning to be good at design is actually taking the time to apply yourself to all sorts of different projects and just experiment. That's all it
Yeah.
is.
And make mistakes and
Yeah.
I guess earn the bruises that comes with that not always working out, not getting the right solution. And yeah, as you say, it's tough because you have to go through a little bit of pain of um, sometimes critique or criticism
Mm.
if things don't land. But I think
But you
one
learn
of the
to
things
take it.
exactly
And
right.
that's the main thing. I think you cannot take criticism personally as a designer, because you just won't advance. You won't get better. Uh, any kind of criticism as a designer is a really good thing, and you need to learn to see it that way.
Yeah, not least because sometimes it's wrong and it's misplaced criticism, and
Mm,
that can kind of help you become even more bulletproof. You say, well, actually, I've received that criticism. It's wrong. It's misplaced, or
yeah.
it's ignorant of the context that I was working to. And I think that's something that, as a data viz field, I don't know if it's fair to say that criticism has become more considered
Mm.
and not gentle in a bad way to say it's all diluted and soft, but I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was quite a lot of brutal criticism taking
It was
place.
pretty harsh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think at some time, in times, it became personal rather than the thing that was being criticised. I think these days it is much more constructive, and it's
Kinda.
kinda that's the best way to summarize it. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But still useful, and
Mm,
that's
yeah.
what it has to be. The other thing that you remarked on in your bio was that so you were starting to apply what you were learning and getting some attention and getting some maybe wins. But then you talk about how maybe things sort of fade away a little bit, and it perhaps is. I wonder if it's at this point when you're starting to realize this coexistence, this harmony, content, and its form and function. Is this perhaps when data viz as the crystallization of these two worlds coming together finally takes shape, but also storytelling seems to be this the kind of key, I don't know, the key wrapper that kind of
Mm.
brings it all together for you.
Yeah, I think so. So when I was learning data visualization, I was all about how do I make this particular data set visually engaging. And I didn't really think anything else of it. So that was the whole challenge for me, especially in that beginning process. But I think the more I practiced that and got experience with that, the more I started questioning, well, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the storytelling comes into it. What's, as you say, the wrapper I can put around this, it's actually going to make it create some sort of value,
Mm.
not just look pretty.
And I think, I mean, we'll come to storytelling as a concept shortly. I think it's a label that is often overused and misused and lazily used. Um, the way that you use it is not. It's the pure embodiment of what you do. Is storytelling as a thing, as a again as an attribute? Is it something that you find an automatic trait, an automatic characteristic of how you make sense of the world, of how you, I don't know, are you a storyteller? Outside of data, is it something that you find out? Have you had parents, grandparents tell you stories. I don't know if I am by default
Mm.
a natural storyteller. I don't know if there's something that comes from a certain, I don't know, maybe shyness by default that I don't know what it is, but I find it something that I have to really work at. It's not necessarily a natural thing. I have to really, really, really work at. No, hopefully I can get there, but is it something that you do find to be just a natural way of thinking?
No. Uh, in simple terms, no. I would not call myself a natural storyteller. I think now I can call myself what's the best word? Maybe a considered storyteller, because
Yeah.
it does take me a while sometimes to pull out or figure out what the story is because I'm dealing with data.
Mm,
Uh, but I think there are some natural storytellers out there, and you just kind of know who they are because people tend to flock to them when they start
that's
talking,
true.
and they're just telling you a story of what they did yesterday, but it's really really interesting and
Yeah.
engaging. Whereas I don't consider myself one of those people, but that's why I think that storytelling can be taught. It's
Yes.
not something that you necessarily have to be born with. And I really love that because there are certain things that you can learn to make yourself better at storytelling. And storytelling doesn't mean that you have to get up and stand up in front of people and think off the top of your head and all of a sudden be this super engaging, different person, because that's not true. That's a type of storytelling that comes naturally to some people, but doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, I think you're right there as well. Maybe if it's not a natural trait, you have by default had to work harder to gain that skill, and it therefore means you know how to get that skill, and you know how therefore to tell others how to get that skill. I think that's something that um, I think it does aid the duties of being a teacher as a trainer when you've had to go through a learning process yourself. You've kind of conquered it, and then you think, right, let me help others, kind of go for that same journey. Um, so we've kind of got to this point now where things are starting to form in terms of the, if not the exact pathway, the direction that you want to head towards. And I guess this is where we reach what I'm calling the rogue penguin years. So rogue penguin is the name that you give to your company as a freelancer. What's the backstory behind the rogue penguin? Is it who you see? Are you the penguin? Are you the rogue penguin?
Uh, no, but I have been called that. Someone actually said, "Oh, I thought your name was Rogue," and I was like, "Man, that's cool." But no, my name is not Rogue. So Rogue Penguin came about like anybody. When you start a company, you kind of think you're going through this whole brainstorming process of what are we going to call it,
Mm,
and so I was sitting around with my husband at the time, and over a few wines, we were just throwing some random words out there to see what's going to stick.
yeah,
And rogue was one of those words that I had an emotional reaction to it. And you kind of
yeah,
want that. You want to feel something.
yeah, yeah.
Because I think all my jobs previously, up to that point anyway, I'd been working for large organizations who always did things a certain way. And there wasn't really a lot of flexibility around that.
Mm,
So rogue for me was kind of one of those terms that meant I'm going to do something different. And that's what I
mm,
wanted to do with the company. And penguin was it was also an emotive word. It was the title of my daughter's favorite book at the time. So
fantastic.
she was 5, and so I'd read this book to her every night, so it was just kind of in my brain. And looking back now, it was quite fitting because New Zealand actually has one of I think it's the highest number of unique species of penguin.
Right,
So it's a nice tie back to New Zealand.
of course it
And
is.
so that's the story.
That's brilliant. I often think, was I too quick to jump to a very boring company name? Visualizing data. Yes, it kind of establishes what I do, but sometimes it gets a bit too mundane, shall we say, a bit too descriptive of yes, I'm doing that. But I like the description there. Especially the rogue. I think really, yeah, I feel that same. I can imagine the connection you felt with the term, that kind of unconventional, that slightly, departing from the safe lane of a conventional employment, working for somebody else. I mean, freelancing, it's not for everyone, and it's not something that is easy and without, obstacles. But is it something that you always felt was your natural working state, or was it the only path in front of you to be able to pursue what I guess was now both a passion and a professional calling?
It was probably both. So I didn't know that it was my preferred way of working until I was actually doing it. But now I couldn't go back. I couldn't go
Mm,
back to working the way that I was
mm.
beforehand because I love it. It's just so much better.
Yeah.
But I think yes, it was kind of I did get to a point in my career that I didn't really have much. Well, I didn't think I had much of a choice to do anything else,
Mm,
because I was working for a bank at the time as an internal analytics consultant, and I'd been working there for about 18 months. And I kind of get to a point with those kind of jobs where 12 to 18 months, it's kind of my limit.
mm,
I start to get a little bit, yeah, I'm not learning anything else here. I'm ready to move on. And I was looking for other data science jobs that I could apply for, but I just wasn't excited about any of them. Nothing was
mm,
motivating me to actually go and try and look for a new job. And I'd always had this idea of, well, maybe I should just do my own thing. And it just kind of got to a point where I was more excited about going off and trying to do my own thing, even if it failed, than I was
yeah.
about trying to go and get the safe job. I think some people think freelancing is a really scary step, but for me, it was scarier not to take it.
Mm, that's interesting. I mean, certainly there's I guess obviously, if it doesn't work out, if you don't get business, you don't get an income, then it will be scary for those people who encounter that. But you're right. I think there's something about there's also there's a sense that if you don't do it, you'll always wonder what if, had
Mm.
I done that, would it have been a different career? But I think for me the autonomy, the control, the being in charge of my own destiny, albeit it's others that ultimately decide to employ my services. It is just my natural state. I need that control. I mean, we're jumping ahead here, but have you ever reached a point where you've been tempted to expand beyond yourself into maybe a small studio, a small group of employed people?
I always said at the beginning that I didn't want to do that. And I actually played around a little bit with getting contractors involved in the first few years of business, just because I had a lot of work, but I didn't enjoy it. I
Mm,
turned into someone who was managing the projects rather than actually being involved in
right.
them. And I don't like that project management side of things. When it comes to even planning a holiday, I'm just like, no, just somebody else just do that.
Yeah.
So that kind of work just didn't interest me. And I'd much rather be doing the work and shaping the field in which I'm working in rather than managing the work of other people doing that. So
Yeah.
for me, no, it's never been about trying to expand to be more.
On at the point of you starting freelancing versus now, the sort of services that you're offering, the sort of clients you've worked with, has it turned out how you expected? Have you ended up doing different things that you sort of surprised by? Were the things that you thought you might be doing that you haven't ended up doing? I mean, for example, I kind of sort of spread my work across a lot of different domains, but I'm perhaps surprised how little I end up actually doing data viz. I'm doing more training or more consultancy rather than
Mm.
the hands-on stuff. So that would be my answer to that question. How do you? I mean, because I think you're looking, maybe is it about 8 years now since you sort of you kicked things off. So
Yeah.
it's a decent sample size.
Yeah, it's a long time. Uh, when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing. I went out and advertised everything I was capable of. So in my first couple of months of the business, I think I had a logo design project and I built a predictive model in SAS. It was just
Wow.
worlds apart.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I let the market shape what my services were for a little bit because I didn't really know where I was going to land and where I was going to end up. I was just happy that somebody was giving me work.
Mm,
And it wasn't until probably a year or two in that I started to think about what do I want to do and what kind of work do I want to be working
mm,
in? Where do I see the future of Rogue Penguin going? And then I started to be a little bit more deliberate in the work that I said yes to and just a little bit more intentional on how I marketed myself. But
mm,
at the beginning, I just had no idea.
mm. And I guess again, you probably can't have an idea until you're in it. But as long as you've got that resilience and that, I guess, nimbleness to respond and react to how things are emerging, how the environment is, then you're always going to be in a good place to prosper. What just on a sort of on like a geographical basis, what's the how compatible is it to be a freelancer in New Zealand? Is it a marketplace that's supportive, or are there? Obviously, I speak to a lot of people across different parts of the world, and in some regions, freelancing is almost um, designed out and away from being a possibility. It's all about corporations and companies, and freelancers have to go through so much treacle to get into workplaces and get opportunities. Is New Zealand, a compatible, a friendly environment to operate as a freelancer?
I think so. I've never really had a lot of issues getting work. I think as soon as you start charging in those hundreds of thousands per project kind of roles, then you have to get sign off for a lot of those kind of
Mm,
budgets.
mm,
But for the work that I do, especially for the workshops that I offer, I'm not in that league. So I
yeah.
think it's very easy for governments and larger corporations to sign that kind of work off quite easy. I think now was quite a hard time for freelancers in New Zealand. We've
Yeah.
just had a whole lot of people laid off from a lot of different government agencies. There's been a lot of redundancies going on, and as a freelancer, you get hit first with that kind of thing. So it comes and goes, the work, and I think you just have to learn to ride out the
Mm,
lows because it will eventually go back up. And that's, I think, something that's quite hard for people if they're not used to this kind of work environment, is that they get a bit down because the work starts to trickle down. But
mm.
I think if you can ride those out, you'll be fine.
That's it. I mean, it's ever so cyclical.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's always easy to say from a distance, but when things are quiet, it's that moment in time when you've got to really get out of that trough mentally and start reading books and start practicing and start developing the next technical skill that you've not had chance to do. And it's difficult. You are always alert to the stress of when's that next email going to come in. But
Mm.
how do you go about separating the doing of the work that you're paid to do with the need to constantly keep all the other things going, like promoting yourself and marketing and reading the latest thoughts in database and practicing the next tools? Do you find that an easy thing to juggle? Because I don't.
I've kind of restructured my work in the last, especially since last year, because when I was writing the book, I needed to carve out some time to actually do that. And so I decided to let go of a lot of my project work. And I thought, I'll just take a bit of a hit this year in terms of money, and I'll just do the workshops and I'll just let some of
Mm,
that hourly work kind of go. And last year turned out to be my best year. So I thought, well,
right. Okay.
what
Something
what am
there.
I doing here? I had all this time
Yeah.
and I made more money than I ever have. So I'm going through this kind of experiment at the moment in terms of the work that I say yes to and the work that I don't. and what else I do with my time. Because while I was writing the book, I was also doing a lot of social media testing of my content, but that just turned out to be marketing in the end. So it
Mm,
brought in more workshop business. So this whole idea of having to do the hourly work for the client because they're paying me doesn't always work out as more if you focus on maybe some of the other stuff to just carry
yeah.
on the business and market the business. So I'm still experimenting in that space, and I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, marketing is it's quite, I don't know, it feels like quite an elusive thing because, as you say, marketing is, it's more than just an advert. Here I am. Here's the thing that I offer. Here's the rate. I'm available for hire. It's expertise communication. It's writing articles. It's doing talks. It's things that don't always have an immediate payoff at that moment in time, but I guess sort of sow the seeds in the mind of a client that you might have in a year's time who saw you a year ago and they just remembered your name. And then when it came to them needing that help, oh, right, who's that person who gave that outlier talk? Oh yeah, let's get in touch. So it's a long game, I guess. It's a long game and it's
Hmm.
not just one track. But again, do you, and I suppose you've had to do this a lot through the book, sorry, through the project of the book. Do you find promoting yourself in whatever form that takes uh, enjoyable, uh, easy, natural? Is it an effort? 'Cause, you know, again, I do find it's necessary, but it can be sometimes an effort.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you do or what you say in order
Mm.
to promote yourself. So the whole idea of going out there and saying, "Look at me, I'm awesome. Look at this work that I've done." It's just I feel a bit cringy when I do that. So I don't like doing that kind of marketing, but for me, it's anything that gets your name out in front of people and shows your expertise in some way. And
Mm,
so that is about sharing knowledge. And so just posting, "Hey, have you tried this?" Or "This is something that I've learned." And so it's not really telling everybody how great you are, but it's just putting your name in the forefront of people's minds when they think about that particular topic.
yeah,
So that's how I like to reframe marketing, and it's a little bit easier to swallow.
yeah, like sort of almost like a knowledge transfer form of marketing. I mean, I think there's probably a fairly shared common sensibility between New Zealanders and British people with the whole not wanting to blow one's own trumpet sort of thing, but let others sort of blow it, you know, in a way through what we see, you know, the expertise that we hopefully offer. But it's, yeah, it's something that's necessary and something that I think is quite a challenge right now with the, you know, we're recording this in September 2024 for those of you 20 years time watching this video, and it's a time of great um, disruption in the sort of social media landscape and the ways and means of connecting the community, but also reaching out to clients. It's all a bit of an unknown quantity right now. I believe you're largely, but not exclusively, focusing on kind of LinkedIn
Yes.
as the main place that you kind of
Yeah.
have yourself. And I've kind of maybe been a bit of a late arrival to LinkedIn, but I do think it's a very good and very useful tool. Um, Mainly in the aftermath of Twitter, which, you know, for many years for a lot of us in DataViz was the platform that we use to connect to each
Mm.
other and discover new people and be found by others. Um, what's, you know, what's your sort of take on on social media as a way for DataViz people to exist, to contribute, to participate, to promote themselves? What, you know, what's your feelings now, especially if you've sort of narrowed things down, and have you found that helpful to not try and keep chasing post there, post there, post there?
Yeah, I think because I was on Twitter. I stopped last year, I think, when it was taken over. But I have tried to get onto Blue Sky. That is something I'm still unsure about how to use. I like LinkedIn because it's a little bit long form, so you
Mm,
can write a little bit more, you can share a little bit more information. It's easier to link
mm,
people to. And I think it's a good way to network. People feel quite comfortable like DMing you, and it's just easy to have those kind of conversations. I'm not really on any other social media. I mean, I have a personal Instagram, but that's not really full of anything database
yeah.
related. But my business, my clients, they're all on LinkedIn, so that's just where I think is the best way for me
Well,
to get in front of
that's
them.
right. It makes a lot of sense, and I think it does require us to just sort of step back and think, well, what's its purpose for us as
Mm,
freelancers? I mean, there is a connecting to the community thing. Strange enough, Blue Sky's had a weird weekend. It seems to have jumped in numbers and activity. I think there might be the Brazilian thing with Twitter falling out there, but I've been reflecting recently about what is it that I'm trying to accomplish with posting on any of
mhm,
these platforms, and LinkedIn is the most directly obvious place to put something on where you hope that somebody out there is wanting to buy something from
yeah.
you, whether it's a book, whether it's services. So, yeah, I do feel that putting my chips onto the LinkedIn part of the landscape is perhaps where things seem to me to make more sense right now. But just on the last point about um, I guess the community, before we get into the book, what's your experience being in New Zealand in terms of the sense of belonging to the data viz world? Um, because in a way, social media should reduce that sense of physical distance. And it's a very small anecdote, but certainly when I've been visiting Australia on 2 or 3 occasions, I've been struck by how out of the loop I felt when I woke up and found a flurry of posts and new work, and then they've all gone to bed. But
Mm.
I'm here, and obviously there is perhaps a European North American sort of bias and leaning in a lot of the visible practitioners in data viz. But what's been your experience from where you are geographically as a member of the community and participant?
I really like that there is this database community and it is global because the database community in New Zealand is very, very small. We have some quite good database communities, but they're all built around database tools. So we have a strong
Right.
Tableau community, Power BI. We even have a SAS community, but they're not they're not tool agnostic in a way that you can go and actually talk about database fundamentals like you can in some other database meetups that are happening, in the UK or in America.
Mm,
But you're right, it's very hard to get to some of those meetups sometimes if they're not recorded because they're happening at my 1 a.m. So it's
yeah.
just, it's just really hard in that respect. But I am still glad that there is this database community going on that at least we can tap into over here because we would be very isolated if it was just us.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and so onto the book. We finally got there after 40 minutes. Um, because all that we've gone through so far is the journey to your freelancing world and to the data viz and to data storytelling. And so the book came out, as I said, at the end of last year, and I found it a really so when I received a copy, sorry, I found it so refreshing. It just felt so different to the other books that are out there. And I just it just that the freshness just jumped off the page, as did the charisma, and we'll come on to that in a second. But and I know you've written kind of extensively about the sort of the book writing process that you went through. And we'll share links to the articles with the show notes. But again, just in a nutshell, what was the opportunity that presented itself for you to write a book, and what was the motivation for you to do so? Because it's not an insignificant undertaking. You've already talked about how you maybe had to put aside a little bit of work
Mm.
to carve out the space. But what's the sort of seed that triggered this this process?
I was one of those people who, for years, said, "Oh, I'm going to write a book one day."
Mm.
And I'd get motivated in a weekend and I'd sit down and I'd lay it all out and I'd pick a color palette and, put the layout all perfectly
Yeah.
as the book sizing and whatnot and InDesign. And then the week following, I'd get, pulled back into project work and I wouldn't touch it for months. So I did this off and on for years. And it was always because I was running these workshops and I'd always get asked, do you have any other resources that we can use, when we go back to our desks?
Got you.
And I really wanted to just give them one thing, one book that said, here is everything we have covered. But in the end, I just gave them lists of different books that they could kind of pick and mix from. So there was always this desire to write a book. I think for me, it just took a long time to actually sit down and motivate myself to do it, because you're right, it's a massive undertaking and I did not realize how much time and effort
Mm.
it was actually going to involve.
And I think you talk about how perhaps the key. Well, you can tell me if it's the key, if it was the key point, but almost writing down a proposal seemed to give it some form, some shape, some kind of clarification about what you were trying to accomplish, what you weren't trying to accomplish, what was kind of out of scope for the book.
Mhm.
But it's a book that you self-published, so this is something where it's all entirely self-motivated. It's something that you are pushing yourself. You haven't got necessarily a publisher banging down the door saying we need chapter 1 by the end of this week. So it takes a hell of a lot of discipline to have done this. But again, from the point of view of how you tackle the writing, did you just have to sort of timetable, next month I want to have chapters 1, 2, and 3 done? Or was it much more of a sort of layering process of, right, I've got an outline draft of the whole thing, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a version 1, version 2. What was the sort of writing sort of strategy that you went through?
So I started with a proposal. I think that was all the advice that I got given. Even if you don't end up going with a publisher, at least the proposal helps you figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
And part of that proposal was chapter outlines, what's going to be included in what chapters, and it gives you an idea of what you have to tackle. But you say that there was nobody banging down on my door, but I needed someone banging down on my door, so I actually paid for someone to bang down on
Ah,
my
okay,
door.
right.
I got
Good idea.
I got a book writing coach and my editor. So I paid for her. She's actually based in the UK. She has a company called The Bookshelf, and I don't think the book would have been produced if it hadn't been for her. So as soon as I started working with her, she set me up on monday.com. She project managed the whole thing. I knew exactly what date I had to deliver what chapter
Wow.
to her, so
Right.
she could get her feedback to me, because I wanted to have it done before Christmas. And so I approached her in March last year and it was published at the beginning of December. So we got there,
Very good.
but
Yeah.
it was a lot of effort on both sides as well. So for someone who knew nothing about the book publishing industry and what was involved, it was really, really good to just have her there to bounce ideas off. She would make suggestions on how I could write better, and it was just really, really nice to have someone in my corner, even though I wasn't publishing with a traditional publisher.
Yeah. I mean, that's terrific. I mean, that in itself should give people out there hope of, I mean, at some point we've all probably got in our mind, yeah, one day I'll write a book. But as you said, it's not an insignificant undertaking, and the fact that you've got this support from the colleague in the UK to give you that structure, that discipline is absolutely invaluable. But it shows you that it can be done. You don't need to have the email from a publisher saying we'd like you to write a book. You can do
Mhm.
these things off your own back and accomplish a brilliant outcome like you did, Kat. I mean, you talk about how the book was a useful manifestation of materials to give people, let's say, attendees at workshops. Did you find, therefore, that the writing of the book was aided by the fact that you'd already gone through the process of structuring materials for delivering teaching? You've already worked out a linearity and a structure and a sectioning of content that probably, or it's not as simplistic as this, but probably does lend itself to, right, pick that up and turn it
Mm.
into some sort of book form.
You would think so, right?
Right.
And to a certain extent, yes, that was what happened. I did follow a lot of the workshop structure that I already had, but I think, I mean, you'll know this when you write a book, you think a lot deeper about
Mm,
the content that you're writing about. And so I think as part of the book writing process, my workshops changed a little bit as well. So it went both
yeah.
ways and they did evolve each other.
Well, I think that's the thing, and again, these things kind of, they coexist and they help each other. Likewise, I found that each time I've written an edition of the book, I've then revisited my teaching materials and thought, right, I need to completely rewrite that thing because that doesn't now make sense in how I've sort of retuned my brain to think about that topic. I've got to redo that, and I guess they sort of bounce back and forth between them. But but also going back to something we mentioned before about, I guess, marketing, promoting. This book is now, it's a business card, right?
Mm.
It's a landing place for people to say, oh, this person doesn't just do workshops and other services. They've also got a book, which just instantly has that extra notch of, I guess, credibility, authority, kudos, and it's something that freelancers, I guess, it's just such an important string to our bow, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that's what I heard about the book is that it does give you that credibility. And for me, who based in New Zealand is quite far away from a lot of things that are going on around the world in terms of data viz meetings. Having that book, having that kudos has made a real difference in my network. I've just expanded my network this year just crazily, and I'm really grateful to the doors that the book has opened for me. So, I mean, everybody says you don't make money off books, and you absolutely don't make money
Yeah,
selling books, but the book opens a lot of doors that can give
100%.
you new business.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a big investment in time. It's a big investment in some respects in risk. Spending 6 months writing a book means that you're maybe not earning the same amount of money in that 6 months. But yeah, I think it's a vital part of a freelancer's armory to have that, and but only if it's good. And that's the beauty of the book, is that it's very, very good. And one of the things that I was delighted to be asked to write a little bit of blurb on the book, and I talked about it as being wonderfully accessible, and I think sometimes that can be read as as a sort of a low level platitude, but it just is ever so accessible. I mean, it's not even. It's just such beautifully written and constructed that I rarely come across a data viz book that felt like a page turner, and
Oh,
and that book is a page turner. You think, right, what's next? And and the fact it's about storytelling as well. I mean, it just works on lots of different method levels. But did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the process of writing it? Because I don't know if I do. I like the result of it, but I don't know. I tell you what, I don't like the editing. I quite like the first
mm.
draft. I hate the refinements. That's what kills me.
Did I enjoy it? I think I enjoyed some of it. I think, the high level
Yeah.
strategy, thinking about what bit goes where. Uh, some of the writing, especially particular chapters, just drove me insane. You feel like you're hitting your head up against a brick wall with some of the writing. So there were parts of it I enjoyed, parts of it I really didn't. The feedback side of things, we kind of talked a bit before about feedback and how you have to just have a bit of a thick
Mm,
skin, but I did invite feedback. So part of my book writing process was to test this book on as many people as possible before I published it. And so I invited people to be beta readers as part of the writing process. And just on LinkedIn, I put the word out. So I had lots of people from all over the world who I didn't know who wanted to test read the book. And I will be forever grateful to these people.
Wonderful.
And I
Yeah.
had about over 50 of them in the end. But when you have that many people giving you feedback and it's not always good, you have to have a really thick skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so some of those emails, I was just, oh, I just can't do this. I can't open it tonight. I'll
Yeah.
just open it tomorrow. But I was very, very grateful that they took the time to do it, because when I took that feedback on board and I changed it, it got better. So all of that feedback was worth it. It was just sometimes really hard to hear.
I can imagine that, especially when it's all been sort of self-driven, and it's something where you're having to make compromises in other ways of using your time, and then, as you said, to wade through this, and I'm sure a lot of it was constructive. I'm sure some of it was, no, you don't understand what I'm trying to do there, but it's no, I mean that's good to hear. I mean, I talked about the kind of charisma of the book, and there's lots of devices that you use. It's not just written. There's illustrations, there's diagrams, there's characters that keep reappearing. Um, it's probably not an easy question to answer, but how did you find that sort of tone of voice? How did you find that kind of almost the sort of first person narrator of the book? Is it just you? Is it just the authentic version of you in written form, or did you have to, I don't know, like, occupy a different mindset for how this book was going to be sort of told?
I think that is my natural way of teaching. I do like to simplify things in a way that's easy to understand, and that's not
Mm,
always with words. Sometimes it's diagrams. For me, the hard part of the book was actually coming up with the style of those diagrams and those characters, and that held me back for quite a while, because all of the work I'd done, probably, well, the majority of work I'd done to date had been about using other people's style. So my clients' brand guidelines and things like that. So trying to incorporate that kind of work
got
into
you.
the design I was doing. But now it was a case of, well, what's my style? I had no idea. And so I was really trying to figure that out. And I think as soon as that clicked, the rest of the book just, it was easy.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine that groove that emerges once you've got that right track. It's something that, yeah, it takes a while to find. Actually, it takes a while to
Mm.
find the voice. But no, it's a super book, and it's also, again, going back to the term storytelling. It is authentically about that topic. It's about that practice. It's all, in a way, it's almost that data is the subplot in a way. Because it is storytelling, and it happens to be focused on data, but not exclusively data. And it's just about giving people that real sense of how to do this, because it can be a very lazy term that I mentioned before, that can be used and misused and applied to things just because it sounds like a buzzword. But this book
Mm.
is exactly as it says on the tin. It is a data storyteller's handbook. So I'm delighted that it exists. I'm delighted you've done it, and I'm delighted it's been a positive experience for you. Before we finish the conversation, I want to just quickly squeeze in a little bit of time for a project that I adore of yours, which is the plastic footprint, the Little Turtles project. This was a piece that you did. Was it around 2020? So I think it was,
Mm.
the
Yeah,
date
it
was
was my
2019, right?
lockdown
Yeah,
project. Yeah.
lockdown project, of course. So this is my plastic footprint, a physical data viz project, and this is something that I love for many reasons, not just the way that you went through experimenting with material, and I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but it took you to a new place in how you express data and how you use materials. But again, just for the benefit of certainly the listeners who won't be able to see, when we'll put it on screen for the video version,
Mhm.
can you sort of talk people through what this thing looks like, what it's about, and then we'll talk a little bit about the process.
Yeah, so it started off with me wanting to know exactly how much plastic waste I was, creating, and I took a year to measure it. So instead of throwing away this plastic in 2019, I kept it, I washed it, I stored it, and I weighed it. So I really wanted to measure my plastic footprint. But I also wanted to do something different with the data. And I'd been really inspired by Amy Cecil's Dado project. At the time, I thought that was just so different. And I wanted to do some sort of physicalisation with it, but I just didn't really know what. So I
And just to
experimented
jump in,
a
sorry, Kat,
lot.
just to jump in for the benefit of the listeners as well. We'll put on Amy's work on the screen, but this was
Mm,
like using sort of Play-Doh, and she did things like she'd stick a plug into it to
yeah,
give an
that's right.
impression of different shapes of plugs that people have around the world. And again, it's that sort of physicalization of data. So we'll share links to that. But sorry, carry on.
Oh, it's a great little mini project that she's got, and yeah, super inspiring. So I was experimenting with different ways that I could use this plastic to actually show the data that I had collected. And I got to a point where I was molding this plastic into different shapes, and one of the shapes were these little turtles. And so the end project was one turtle equaled 1 day of my plastic footprint. No, sorry, it wasn't 1 day, it was 1 hour of my plastic footprint. So
Right.
I had to create something like less than just a bit under 9,000 turtles for the year to visualize the whole plastic footprint. I didn't do this.
Yeah.
That was way, way, way too many turtles, but I do still have a big stack of
I
plastic
was about
turtles
to
that I
ask,
have
where are the
created.
turtles right now? Yeah.
Yeah, they're in the roof.
But I mean, you mentioned it's a lockdown project, but you've already done the data collecting before a
Mm.
pandemic has even been discussed. So you must have realized that on the horizon next year, there's going to be some weird disruption to everyone's lives to do this. But yeah, I mean, what I love about it, it's not just the thoroughness of the data collecting. It's not just about the concept, but also just how you talk about sort of experimenting with different types of plastics and how to even melt them and how to mold
Mm.
them. But also, there's something beautiful about the end product. You know, that each of those little turtles, like almost different unique marbles, they are beautiful, but they've come out of trash. And I just think almost like a clever rebirth of the material, but to make the
Mm.
point about, I don't know, it is a point about not just your own consumption, but anyone's consumption. And to think that if this wasn't taking this form now, it would be broken down, it would be in the oceans, it would be in landfill, it would be somewhere not beautiful like these little things are. Even if they're in the roof space, it's still a nice
Mm.
place to be. Did it, first of all, from the point of view of the reflections of the topic and the subject matter, did it change your behavior? Did it make you think differently about how you consume and how you manage your household waste?
Uh, yeah, I mean, it definitely had those reflections about the topic, but I think it also made me feel differently about how we visualize data,
Mm,
because when I graphed that data, it didn't mean anything to me. It
yeah.
was a bit hollow. It was just a simple bar graph, but it just lost all the feeling I had when I was actually looking at the raw materials. I was looking at the plastic. So I think being able to pull through some of those raw materials into the way in which I was visualizing that data helped keep some of the feeling I had
Mm,
in for the what was actually being visualized. And I think that those reflections were important to me because a lot of the time we use data viz to try and understand some pretty hard topics,
mm.
and not hard as in hard to understand, but actually just emotionally hard
Heavy.
topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we lose some of that heaviness when we put it into a bar chart or a line chart. And for me as a data storyteller, it's I'm always trying to figure out ways to bring some of that empathy back. So this project was obviously very, very far from what I do in my day
Mm,
job, but it was playing around with that idea of how do we bring some real life into the way in which we share this data, because data can just be it can just lose a lot of its meaning and feeling with the way that we present it in charts.
100%. And I don't know. It often seems to me that around 2015, 2016, there was a little bit of a change in the data viz world's mentality that lent itself to embracing imprecision
Mm,
and feel of data rather than just the reading of data. And it's, this is not just about doing crazy experimental ideas for the sake of those ideas. It's about finding, as you've said, different ways to convey things that might have more impact there than necessarily there,
mm,
because there's different levers that we have to pull at different times. And what I also love about this project is, and I think it's something you articulate in the process right up. Obviously, we can't all see one of these turtles. We can't pick them up because we're not in the same physical place as you are. But it's that companion of creating something physical but sharing it digital that makes it
mm,
possible to disseminate, to share. And I think sometimes when people get excited about these projects that don't naturally live on the page or on the screen in their initial form, they can still exist. You can video them, you can find different ways of sharing them to make
yeah.
them come alive and spread around the world. So just to kind of close off that, was that something that you felt again as a sort of a takeaway from this experience, that you can find different ways of showing data and also find different ways of sharing that data?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was something I didn't really give a lot of thought at the beginning of that project. I did have ideas about, oh, it's a data physicalisation project, so that means I'm going to show it somewhere, exhibit it somewhere. And then COVID hit, and I
Mm.
was like, wow, I can't do that. So I did have to rethink about how am I going to share this data? And it forced me to learned some photography skills. I didn't really know a lot about photography, but I had to learn it in order
Mm.
to be able to make this physical thing digital. And then think about, well, what social media platform am I going to share this on? And Instagram for this project was the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And so that became its own Instagram account. But yeah, things that I didn't really give too many thoughts previously when I first started, because I just assumed in my head, oh, it's in this physical space, that means people can only see it in that
Mm.
space. So that was a bit of an eye-opening experience.
And again, I think it also speaks to how, and it's not just for freelancers, it's any creator. Sometimes you just got to say, right, this project will involve learning some new skills and having to go through the kind of learning curve of, yeah, what's the best way to photograph a melted plastic turtle? You may never previously thought, I might need to learn that skill, but it's something that sometimes you have to do. I mean, I also, for the new edition of my book, I did some unexpected photography of toy cars to try and convey something. And yeah, you just got to roll your sleeves up and go with it.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a brilliant project. I love it to bits, and the book as well. And it's been a wonderful chance to catch up and meet in
Mm.
person. I'm very aware it's late into your evening now, Kat, so we're gonna bring the conversation to a close. So thank you ever so much for joining me today, and thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there. We'll see you soon for another episode of Explore Explain. Thanks for now.
Bye.
To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualisingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing and spreading the word. See you next time.